Okay, so look at all these different webcams I've got here. I've got 8 different Logitech webcams, everything from the C920 from 2012 all the way up to the latest MX Brio and everything in between. And I'm going to determine what's the best webcam from Logitech, whether you're going to school from home, working from home, or just setting up a stream or a YouTube channel. Let's compare all of them against each other in their default settings and also their tune settings. Let's go. Okay, so I was looking through all my purchase history the other day in Amazon. I realized that almost every single Logitech webcam offered is something that I've purchased in the last 4 years. I've probably got 70 different webcams, and I've done a couple of shootouts in terms of all the different Logitech main cameras, but I haven't done anything recently in 2025 to really compare finally the latest MX Brio, which is their flagship camera, all the way back to the Logitech C920 that you can still buy today right now. So what I'm going to do is actually go through all of them more or less in chronological order. And I'm going to start out with the C920, and we're going to work our way all the way up to the MX Brio. Of course, I'll put chapters in all along the way so you can skip to the camera that you're most interested in. This is in no means or any way sponsored by Logitech. I paid for all of these cameras with my own money. So let's get started now with the Logitech C920, probably the greatest or the GOAT of webcams in terms of something that people have been using for years and years now, ever since 2012. Okay, so this is the Logitech C920, and this is actually the original version from 2012, the Logitech C920, with its default settings and also its microphone, no filters, nothing changing in terms of the audio settings or the camera itself, just to see what it looks like and also hear what it sounds like. So that's the Logitech C920, and it is a great camera still, even today. But I tried to tweak it a little bit to get it better than it was out of the box. I just couldn't manage to get it any better. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with its out of the box tune for the best possible setup, at least in my situation. And we're going to move on to the next one, which is the Logitech C925e. All right, so this is the Logitech C925e, the successor to the Logitech C920. It's on its default image settings and also default microphone, just so you can see and hear what the Logitech C925e sounds like. Okay, so I noticed that this camera was a little bit sharper than the C920 out of the box, but I thought I could do a little bit more to it, so I tweaked its settings a little bit further just to see how much better I could make it. Okay, so this is the Logitech C925e. I've tweaked the settings a little bit. The one thing that's a little bit different between the C920 and this one, which is a little strange, is that I have to use Logitune to tweak it. I cannot do that with Logi Options Plus software. So with Logitune, I can basically tweak the settings a little tiny bit just to kind of go into what I have set. So the temperature for the white balance, the auto white balance, put me at around 4,000 kelvins, and I've gone up to about 43.99. I also changed my contrast a little bit. It was a little flat. I gave it a little bit more contrast. It still looks a little bit pink to me in terms of the saturation, but I did try moving that down a little bit. Maybe I'll move it down a little bit more here. I'm going to move the saturation down to 125. I think that's a little bit better. So move the saturation down just a hair to 125. And then I have the sharpness and everything kind of on defaults, and contrast was up by 3 points only. So everything kind of default is at 128. Again, this is the Logitech C920e with tweaked settings. All right, so a couple of observations in terms of the Logitech C925e. I didn't like its microphone as much as the Logitech C920, the built-in mic, but I thought its image was just a little bit better. It wasn't great. I don't think either of them were perfect, but it did a little bit better, I think, in terms of just the optics, maybe the glass, the optical stack of that camera might have been a little tiny bit better. It's a little bit newer camera too, but both of them did pretty close to the same. Now let's move on to the Logitech Brio 4K. Now this was kind of a groundbreaking camera in its day, and it still really holds out, you know, in terms of one of the most sharp cameras, and it's 4K 30 frames per second or 1080p 60. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 4K, the original Brio 4K from 2017. Just to see what that looks like and hear what that sounds like. The big difference this camera has from the others is that it also supports Windows Hello facial recognition, It does 4K 30 and also 1080p 60. This is the default image and also the default microphone from the camera with no filters or anything applied. Okay, so I'm not loving the audio. It is a little bit yellowish, kind of like I've observed in other videos if you've seen on my channel. It's better than it was. With the firmware update, it definitely got better. I didn't put as much blue in my background on purpose just so that its kind of overall frame metering didn't get thrown out and make me even more yellow. But let's see if I can tune it a little bit more just to get some of that yellow out and maybe desaturate it a little bit so it looks a little bit more natural. Okay, so this is the Logitech Brio 4K again. This time I've tweaked the image a little bit just to go over some of the settings. I set the temperature up closer to where my lights are at 5,000 Kelvin, so it's at 4990. I've got the brightness at the normal default setting, contrast at 55%. The saturation I've got at 39%. I thought it looked a little bit oversaturated. It kind of looks a little bit pink now, but I think it's pretty close to where it should be. And I did turn on auto exposure. So I'm filming right now at 1080p 60 because all the other cameras that I'm going to show are 1080p except for this one and the MX Brio. But I've got the ISO at 1000 and the shutter speed at 1/120. I've got HDR on. Let me just go ahead and turn it off and see if that's any different. Not really, so I'll go ahead and keep the HDR turned on. Again, this is the Logitech Brio 4K, the original one from 2017. All right, so that wasn't too bad. Wasn't great. I think it was sharp. But the one thing that I would like to do is improve its microphones. That's one weakness I would say on that camera, even though it's got Windows Hello and the image is sharp. It's 90 degrees, which I like too. It's a nice wide field of view. There are some opportunities there in terms of things like microphone and just the color balance of that camera aren't perfect. So let's move on to the Logitech StreamCam. Now this was one of the kind of newer cameras to support both vertical and horizontal filming. I'm going to go ahead and show you it in more of a landscape mode, but this is the Logitech StreamCam at 1080p default settings. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the Logitech StreamCam. Again, this is the default camera setting. This is the default microphone. Actually, no, I've changed the microphone on this one. I'm going to try out mono with beamforming right now, but let me go ahead and change it over to stereo and see if it does anything. This is the stereo microphone to see if it sounds any different. This is a unique feature on this camera because it has the mono with beamforming microphone, so I'll be curious to see what that sounds like. Let me go back to the camera settings. Everything else is default. Again, this is the StreamCam from Logitech. Okay, so the Logitech StreamCam did okay. It was a little bit blown out, I think, in terms of its saturation. The microphone wasn't bad, but not great. So let's have a look at the Logitech StreamCam with a little bit of tuning done to it. Okay, so this is the StreamCam from Logitech with a few different image tweaks. Now, I thought it was a bit on the kind of gray and almost looked like it was raw video or something in terms of its like S-Log or something, in terms of its output, but it was a bit grayish, so I've added some color to it. I've beefed up the saturation to 55% from 50. I've taken the contrast down just 2 to 48%. Turned off auto white balance in my case, turned it to 4700 kelvins, which I think makes it a little bit closer to natural skin tones. It was a little bit, again, a bit too gray or something before. Now, I think the trick though was actually the auto exposure. So I turned that off, left it at 1/60 because this should be 30 FPS, and I set the ISO to 800. So what I think here actually looks pretty good. I never really enjoyed the image of this camera, but I think the auto exposure, turning that off and adjusting the ISO and the shutter speed, and then making those minor tweaks to contrast and saturation, brought this camera some new life. Let me know what you think in the comments, but this is the tuned settings or tweaked settings for the Logitech StreamCam. Okay, so that was the Logitech StreamCam. I gotta say, I've kind of warmed up to the camera. I never liked it much to begin with, but I think now with kind of the right lighting, the right tuning, using the Options Plus software, it's come kind of into its own in terms of being a decent camera. I recently updated the firmware to the final version of it, it doesn't look too bad. So let's move on now to the newer generation of Brio cameras, starting with the most budget Brio, the Brio 101, which is the same as the 100 series, or if you see a 105 or other 100, 03 or 05 or 01 numbers, they're all the same camera. Some are meant for business and some are meant for consumer, but this is the Brio 101. Okay, so this is the Logitech Brio 101, the most budget camera at the moment from Logitech, with all of its defaults, the default image, and the default microphone, just so you can see and hear what the Logitech Brio 101 looks like and sounds like. All right, so this one wasn't great. 58 degrees field of view, so it was a bit pushed in. Not a lot of detail. You could see it's a bit grainy in terms of image. I tried to tweak it to make it a little bit better. I'm not sure if it made it much better, but let's have a look at that. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 101 with a few different tweaked settings. You can see the kind of the field of view is a bit narrower with its 58 degree kind of width field of view. But what I've done actually is I've taken the exposure, auto exposure, turned that off in Logi Capture Plus. I've set the ISO to 1000, the shutter speed to 1/60, which is basically what I've been doing for all the different 30 frames per second cameras like this one. And I have the saturation to 47%. It's a little tiny bit down. It seemed a little bit oversaturated on my main monitor, so hopefully I'm making the right call here. But this is the Logitech Brio 101 with slightly tweaked settings, not majorly tweaked, just so you can see and hear what the Logitech Brio 101 sounds like and looks like. And yeah, it's not really that much better, but it changed it a little bit in terms of giving it a little bit more color, a little bit different exposure. Don't know if it's really an improvement over the way it was out of the box. Now let's go ahead and look at the Logitech Brio 301, which is the next step up from the 101. The 300 series, again, all of these are the same camera. Mine happens to be the business model. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 301. I am using the default camera settings, the default microphone, just to see what it looks like and also hear what it sounds like out of the box with nothing configured at all. Everything is at default. All right, so this one's kind of contrasty. It almost has a film look to it, which is kind of cool in a weird way. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 301. What I've done is I've actually turned off auto exposure, and I think that was the major change that I made to it to get it from being as, it was slightly blown out before. But now I've got the ISO at 500. I've got the shutter speed at 1/60. And let me just go to the image settings here. And the other thing I did was I took down the contrast. It looked a bit contrasty out of the box. So I took down the contrast from 50 to 45%. So these are the tweaked settings. Okay, so the Logitech Brio, the 300 series is pretty good. In a weird way, it looks very filmic. Not sure if that's what you want, but I kind of enjoy the way that looks in a way, just kind of having that retro look. I think the microphone's decent on this camera as well. Now let's go ahead and move up to the Logitech Brio 500. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 500. It was the flagship for a while until the MX Brio came out, but this is kind of in the higher end of the Logitech current lineup. This is the default image and also the default audio from its microphone. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad, but let's see if we can tweak it a little bit more. The Logitech Brio 500 with tweaked settings. All right, so this is the Logitech Brio 500. Now this time what I've done is I've turned off the auto exposure. This one only needs to be at ISO 300, which seems pretty low in terms of the ISO. I'm guessing it's got a bit bigger sensor than some of the other ones we've been testing. But 300 ISO at 1/60 shutter speed, which I think is pretty normal. Again, we're doing everything more or less at 30 frames per second, 1080p. And I have the saturation. That's probably the major thing I set because it was a bit gray, a bit unsaturated, I think. Again, it kind of had that almost S-Log raw kind of look out of the factory settings. So I've turned the saturation up in this case to 60%, 10 points up higher than it was kind of with default settings. I've taken the contrast to 53%, and I've taken the brightness down to 47%. And I think what this yields is a pretty close to natural image. I think the, the skin tones and the blues and everything, and my shirt's dark blue, It looks black in some of the cameras you'll see, but it actually looks pretty close, I think, to reality. Again, this is the Logitech Brio 500 with slightly tweaked settings. All right, that's looking a little bit better. It still kind of has that contrasty filmic look, almost like the 301 that I tried before. Now we're going to go up to the new flagship camera from Logitech. They still make the Logitech Brio 4K, but this is the MX Brio, which has a lot more settings and dialing in that you can do with the software, whether you're using Logitune or Options Plus or G-Hub. Let's have a look at the MX Brio. By the way, this is the same camera as the 700 series from Logitech as well. Okay, so this is the Logitech MX Brio, also known as the 700 series or the 701 if it's the business device, or 705, just so you can see what it looks like and also hear what the microphone sounds like. Kind of like my last review, if you watch that, the full review on this camera, it does like to pop those blues. So I look like I'm from Arrakis a little bit with my baby blue eyes, but yeah, this camera really likes to pop those blues. So this is what the default image looks like. If you like that, I think the skin tones and things aren't too far out, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit and see what I can make it look like with some minor modifications to the image. Okay, so this one looks pretty good. I'm not even sure if I can get this one to look any better. It does have a lot of that kind of blue popping out of it. It does do a bit more in terms of the color, you know, just making that saturation higher, but it's more of a background thing. I think the skin tones and everything else looked pretty close to where they should look. Let's have a look at tweaked settings to see if I can make it just a little bit better. Okay, so this again is the Logitech MX Brio. I think I found what the reason for those kind of really blue eyes were. It was basically the vibrance settings, which are unique to this camera, by the way. When you go into exposure, so there are different exposure settings. I've turned off auto exposure, but there's exposure compensation on this one, which is nice, kind of like a full-blown camera where you can go up, you know, 0.3, 0.7, or 1 on the exposure value from kind of auto exposure. And I've also, so not only turned that off, but I've set the ISO at 300, which I think is pretty low, but pretty good. And then I've kept the auto white balance. I thought the white balance was actually okay as I fiddled with it. It was pretty close. So what I've done though is I've turned down the vibrance 10, and I think that cooled those blues down that were pretty radical on the blues. But then it came out a little bit gray, so I had to take the saturation and bring that up to 60, so it's up 10 on the saturation side. Everything else is more or less kind of where it came from the factory. But these are the tweaked settings for the Logitech MX Brio. I think it looks pretty good here, but you know, they're all varying a little bit from camera to camera. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, Logitech MX Brio or 701 or 705 for the business models. Okay, so it was debatably better in terms of my tweak settings in terms of the MX Brio. I actually think both of them looked pretty good. I do think in a lot of ways it is more accurate than the Logitech Brio 4K, my version from 2017. They're both great cameras, and yes, the MX Brio does not have Windows Hello integration, but Windows Hello has recently kind of evolved as well to get more secure with enhanced sign-in security, which means that USB peripherals don't work in a secure way like it would if, for example, if it was a bezel camera that's directly connected to the board of your PC. So Windows Hello ESS isn't supported by the Brio. Yes, it's convenient, but it's not the most secure way to sign in using biometrics compared to, say, Windows Hello ESS support on a, say, Surface device with the camera and the bezel. Okay, so one thing I do want to do, though, is actually compare all the different cameras kind of side by side, Brady Bunch style on one frame, and just to see all 8 of them to see how they look, especially in terms of things like skin tone against each other. And I'm going to show them in default mode first. So now you can see every one of the cameras. I'll label each one of them in the actual visual that you can see here as well, so you can see which camera is which, obviously. But now I want to go ahead and move on to the tweaked or tuned settings that I showed to see how they compare once you've applied a little bit of tuning to them. And you'll see, especially then, just like you saw in the default settings, actually, how much different they do look as I added a bit of tweaking, tuning to the image. Okay, so what's my overall opinion then on all these different webcams? Well, the one that surprised me actually, that's I think fairly budget these days and a bit of an older camera, is the StreamCam with a bit of tuning. I thought that one turned out pretty good. The Logitech Options Plus software I think had a few more options than I was used to. It did well in my lighting setup, which is kind of a normal lighting setup with a key light here and a fill light over there. And, you know, it did pretty well. I would say otherwise, I would stay away from the 100 series Brio. I think it's just, yes, it's very budget minded, but it's not a very crisp and sharp image. It's got fixed focus, so you can't get it perfectly focused in. I'd go to the 3 or the 500 series instead. If you do have the money, I would do the 500, which was a little bit closer to the MX Brio. Of course, it maxes out at 1080p, so if you want to get 4K or 1080p 60, you're going to want the MX Brio, and it also has a lot more options in terms of the app using Logitech Options Plus. So I would recommend that app, by the way, over things like G-Hub, especially if you're in a business. I actually also recommend it over Logitune, which I like too. It's a little bit of a lighter weight app, but Options Plus gives you kind of the keyboard, mouse, and application of webcam settings in one, and it can do firmware updates and all of those things. So hopefully this helps. If you liked this video, give me a like. Otherwise, subscribe to my channel for more webcam reviews, microphone reviews, and also software tips and tricks for streaming, working from home, and presenting, and we'll see you again soon.